Hey, this is Zulem Urbina, and tune into the relay for the latest news in boxing all around the world. Thank you for supporting myself and other female boxers. We truly appreciate it.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. It was announced earlier today that Claressa Shields has re-inked a pact with the PFL, what's reported to be a long-term MMA contract.
Multi-year deal.
I think the last time that we saw Claressa Shields in the cage in the octagon, it was opposite the octagon, Mexico's own Gabby Martinez. Claressa suffered her first professional loss as an MMA fighter. It was a dignified loss, if I'm being honest with you, and she took it a lot better than I expected her to. Claressa Shields, not being one who's accustomed to losing at anything, and her ego being as big as it is, I wondered how she would have handled a loss in the sport of mixed martial arts, and she took it in stride.
Yeah.
She handled it well, and she's ready to get back on the saddle.
She's young.
There's not a lot left for Claressa to do in the sport of boxing. There's not a lot left for her to do at 154, 160, and 168. This endeavor into mixed martial arts, Claressa Shields being young enough to spend the next year, maybe even 2 years, three, campaigning as a mixed martial artist. She's young enough that she can do that and one day return to the sport of boxing when those divisions are more populated, more densely packed, and the talent pool, the landscape changes a bit, because she's already been there and done that with Marie-Eve Dicaire and Christina Hammer, Savannah Marshall, Franchon Cruz,
Nikki Adler, Tori Nelson.
It's unfortunate that she never got to settle affairs with Raquel Miller, still an unbeaten fighter, and her domestic rival, what barbs they've traded over the years, though in truth, Raquel hasn't made much of a splash, so there's not really a feeling of unfinished business, real unfinished business between Claressa and Raquel. Thus, Claressa not having that much to do and not that much to choose from anywhere in between 154 and 168. I understand the logic. I see the logic.
Claressa was insistent that a rematch with Savannah Marshall, if there was to be one, it would have to happen in the United States. And the problem with that entire scenario is doing the rematch in the UK gets more money, more bang for your buck than doing it in America. Unfortunately, Claressa doesn't have the kind of drawing power that would bring Savannah across the pond.
That fight, that rematch, would draw more of a crowd and get better coverage in the United Kingdom at the O2 Arena than the United States at some place over there in Claressa's neck of the woods. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation, and that is likely why she's delving into the sport of mixed martial arts. Initially, upon her first endeavor, she cited sexism in the sport of boxing, misogyny.
She said that Showtime tried to cut her purses in half, down from $300,000 to $150,000. She said they didn't believe she had enough drawing power to put her on pay-per-view. I think Showtime was right, unfortunately.
Claressa did not leave the Showtime platform where she started her career off. She didn't leave that platform on amicable terms. And a part of the reason she said she wanted to go into mixed martial arts was because of the money, and she felt that MMA was more hospitable towards women fighters than the sport of boxing was, which isn't entirely true, but she has her reasons.
I mean, maybe that's more true in America than some other regions of the world. She might have a point there, but things are better now for a woman boxer than they were when she initially made those comments.
Something like 2, maybe 3 years ago. And if Claressa can really dedicate herself, her mind, her body, and her competitive spirit to the sport of mixed martial arts the same way that she's done that in the sport of boxing, she could achieve success. I mean, I know she's got the personality of a bear trap, but as far as being a competitor, she does have the right attitude.
As far as being a competitor now, as far as being a public figure, she's just not good with people.
That is the reality of Claressa Shields.
This means she's not going to be fighting Keith Thurman?
Or the winner of Savannah Marshall versus Jadeja Green, which I have no doubts is en route. Jadeja Green being the mandatory challenger for more than one of Savannah's newly obtained titles up there at super middleweight. Doesn't look like Claressa's going to be sticking around to fight the winner of that fight. She may be away for a while.
She's only 28 years old. If she spends the next 2 years in the octagon, she can still come back at age 30.
Maybe age 30, 31 years old, which is not too old at all to still make a splash and still assert herself as the most dominant force anywhere in between 154 and 168 pounds. And by that time, who knows what the landscape will look like? In many ways, Clarissa Shields, since having debuted as a pro, many ways, she's bottlenecked most of the good fights anywhere at or around these weights, leaving her with very little to do at this time and making this endeavor into the PFL well-timed.
She goes off, does whatever she's going to do in the PFL, comes back, it could be a completely different landscape, so we'll see what shakes out.
Men's super middleweight news. Per tweet from Michael Benson, the rumors seem to be true that David Benavidez and Demetrius Andrade are in the process of finalizing a deal for a super middleweight fight on pay-per-view in the fall in Las Vegas. Sources told ESPN, intriguing showdown for one of boxing's best talents who's coming off a career best win, a decision over Caleb Plant. And finally, a big fight for Andrade, who has long deserved one.
Two of Canelo Alvarez's biggest fans.
Hangers on, I should say, riding his coattails all the while, facing lackluster competition. The fight between them is a good fight and an intriguing fight. Not that long ago, the name of David Benavidez was tied to a potential David Morrell fight in the fall, but those plans fizzled out once David Benavidez himself called it fake news, that he's not interested in fighting David Morrell. He would much rather fight Jaime Munguia. Like I told you, that fight wasn't likely to happen either, but this fight...
I dare say that this fight is a good substitute, a good alternative. Demetrius Andrade is a more experienced professional than David Morrell,
and a trickier fighter, more polished boxer than Jaime Munguia, the former U.S. Olympian who sports a professional record of 32 wins with no losses, no draws, 19 knockouts.
Two-division champion, a champion at junior middle and middle, aspiring to become one at super middle.
He's 35 years old, approximately 9 years older than David Benavidez, a volume puncher, a pressure fighter.
A statuesque one. He's big. He's always been big for super middleweight. Many would say that David Benavidez should have moved up in weight a long time ago.
Rationale behind him staying at super middleweight, squeezing all the way down to 168 pounds is likely that the fighters at super middleweight have more of a profile than the fighters up there at light heavyweight.
Sporting a professional record of 27 wins with no losses, no draws, 23 knockouts. 23 of his 27 fights have ended by way of knockout. But when it comes to David
and Demetrius, we have to be honest. This is an intriguing battle of the unbeatens because we don't really know how good either of these guys are. You know, Demetrius Andrade, he might have been a champion at two weights, at junior middle and middle, but it's not like he faced the best and brightest fighters at either of those weights. Now, some of those situations weren't his fault, but some were.
You could definitely make the argument that Gennady Golovkin should have fought him.
And Jermall Charlo at middleweight, but what about at junior middleweight? You could make the argument that Demetrius should have fought Arislandi Lara.
That he should have fought Jermell, that he shouldn't have bailed on him all those years ago.
That he shouldn't have bailed on Matvey Karabov. That he shouldn't have bailed on Sergey Derevianchenko. That he shouldn't have bailed more recently on Yanibek Alimkhanalai or Zach Parker.
The culmination of Demetrius Andrade and every single decision he's made in the name of business in his career is on the other side of this fight, as this would be the biggest fight and the biggest win of his career. The question is, can he win?
Being honest with you, in spite of Demetrius having bailed on Yanibek Alimkhanalai, I would have gave him better odds to beat Yanibek Alimkhanalai at the time he was ordered to fight him than what I'm giving him now to beat David Benavidez. A bigger, more active fighter.
The Alimkhanalai fight was an easier fight to win than this one.
I think it would have been. I think the Zach Parker fight would have been an easier fight to win than this one, but this one has...
This fight has more of a profile than those fights do, though does it have enough of a profile that it should be happening behind a paywall?
David Benavidez made his pay-per-view debut earlier this year in March, his decision win over Caleb Plant. Many expected that David would knock out Caleb Plant in similar fashion to what Canelo Alvarez did over a year ago.
He promised he would.
He failed to deliver on that promise. He beat him, he definitely beat him, but he didn't stop him. So you have to wonder, if you couldn't stop Caleb Plant,
how are you going to stop a fighter that's never been stopped before?
Demetrius Andrade, he's been dropped before. He has at least two times that I can remember, but he's never been stopped. He's an unbeaten fighter in what is this battle of the unbeatens.
He's never been stopped.
David Benavidez, who has amassed a cult following for pouncing on what are mostly overmatched opponents, guys like David Lemieux,
Tyrone Davis, Romer Angulo. I mean, for all the hullabaloo about David Benavidez, his resume.
It's not indicative of a fighter who's been at super middleweight for not just one, but two separate cycles of world champions. This guy's been at super middleweight as far back as when Zurdo Ramirez was there.
As far back as when Zurdo, George Groves, James DeGale.
He's been at super middleweight a long time, long enough to see two separate cycles of world champions as titles changed hands until ultimately Canelo Alvarez comes along and unifies them all.
The WBA title that passed from George Groves to Callum Smith.
The WBO title that Zurdo vacated when he moved up in weight, which was later picked up by Billy Joe Saunders.
The IBF title that James DeGale vacated, which subsequently went to Jose Uzcategui, who lost it to Caleb Plant.
Canelo Alvarez, who came along and beat Caleb Plant, took his belt. Billy Joe Saunders took his belt. Callum Smith took his too.
David Benavidez has been there the whole time, and his resume has very little to show for it.
Would say this is the stiffest test David Benavidez will have faced, and it's arguably the biggest fight of his career, though. How big is it in a general sense? I mean, is this the kind of fight that really should be happening behind a paywall? I can tell you that I have every intention of purchasing the fight. I do, but I watch the sport a lot more closely than many others, so I don't know what this is going to do at the box office, because it's not like the Plant fight did astronomical numbers.
It didn't.
Good a fight as this might be, a battle of the unbeatens, a battle of former champions who still have unblemished records, I can't tell you wholeheartedly that Demetrius Andrade adds even more value to the fight than Caleb Plant did. I dare say that more people might actually be familiar with Caleb because he fought Canelo than they are with Demetrius, who fought no one.
What's this gonna do at the box office?
I remember hearing that Benavidez versus Plant did just north of 100,000 pay-per-view buys. Could they really do better than that with this fight? And if they can't, why is it on pay-per-view?
Because both guys want a lot of money. David Benavidez wants a lot of money to fight somebody like Demetrius Andrade, and the same is true in reverse. Thus, the only way to get them that money is to stick this on pay-per-view, hoping the money comes from me and you.
Showtime's not about to break the bank to give these guys exorbitant guarantees.
Give them a nominal guarantee, and hopefully the rest will come from the upside of the pay-per-view, if there even is one.
But it is a good fight. I can't say I'm disappointed. Quite the opposite. I like this fight. I have every intention of purchasing it. The question is, how many people feel like I do? How many people are actually going to buy this thing?
Matchmakers at the PBC are sparing no expense to make this the most intriguing year of boxing they've ever had.
But it's safe to say that this fight, good as it is not going to do Garcia versus Davis numbers.
I'm not gonna do that. What I'm going to say is, we talking about everybody else in a pound for pound. But when is Gervonta Davis going to go somewhere in a pound for pound? Anui deserve to be in a pound for pound? Absolutely. Do Terrence Crawford deserve to be in a pound for pound? Absolutely. But what about Gervonta Tank Davis? What about? I mean, he deserved to be somewhere also in a pound for pound.
Why don't they give him that credit?
Because he was affiliated with me. He was affiliated with me.
Sounds like a lot of nonsense when Floyd Mayweather Jr., back when he was an active fighter, he was on the pound for pound several times, rated #1 pound for pound in the sport.
He got his plaudits.
Making Gervonta Davis out to be a victim because he doesn't tick off on several boxes like Naoya Inoue, like Terrence Crawford, Canelo Alvarez, Alexander Usyk. And these guys, they've got their differences, but they also have a lot in common. Every single one of those aforementioned fighters have seen themselves crowned not just a Ring Magazine champion or a lineal champion, but an undisputed champion, whereas Gervonta, he has yet to unify a title, much less become an undisputed champion.
He's not a victim, he's just protected.
Whenever the pound-for-pound list is brought up, subject to some debaters, nobody really agrees on who should be there and where. Some will dismiss the list altogether, saying it's just a mythical list anyway. What does it matter? Well, it matters enough to Floyd that he would like to see Gervonta Davis ranked on there, but for having accomplished what? Gervonta's only ever been a champion at one weight, and that's super featherweight. The first title that he won, first full title that he won, was the IBF title from Jose Pedraza.
Right.
He ended up picking up a vacant WBA super title in the Jesus Cuellar fight, and sometime later, he picked that same WBA title back up from Leo Santa Cruz.
Yeah.
He vacated it, moved up in weight, then moved back down,
Yeah.
and fought Leo for it. He's only been a champion at one weight.
He's been campaigning as a lightweight since 2019, roughly 3-4 years.
And that's been a hot division, a hot weight class, but he never got around to fighting Vasil Lomachenko or Teofimo Lopez or George Kambosos, who beat him, or Devin Haney, who beat him. Now Shakur Stevenson is there, and what are the odds that Gervonta Davis is going to fight him?
Gervonta Davis, who's campaigned at 135, campaigned at 140, but didn't fight any of the somebodies at either of those weights. He didn't fight Josh Taylor, he didn't fight Regis Prograis, he didn't fight Subriel Matias, and he's not about to.
The only titles that he's ever held at either 135 or 140 are secondary titles that are little more than segues to fight for the full title against the full champion.
And he hasn't done that, so why should he be rated on the pound for pound? For what reason? What reason exactly?
While Floyd Mayweather Jr. makes him out to be a victim, slighted by the American boxing media, nobody's actually asking Gervonta to do something they're not asking everyone else to do.
He doesn't meet the standard.
There's nothing stopping Floyd Mayweather Jr. from ranking him as a pound-for-pound fighter, or any of Gervonta Davis' supporters. His fans, they can rank him on that list wherever they like.
Who gives a shit?
If Floyd Mayweather Jr. feels so inclined to complain that the periodicals, the popular ones, don't rank Gervonta Davis as a pound-for-pound fighter, it's because he would like for that fighter to be thought of as being in that ilk, that caliber of fighter.
Without having to earn it.
You could probably come across some Gervonta Davis fan that rates him on their own pound-for-pound list, though if Floyd wants the popular periodicals to rate him, it's because it makes him easier to sell, easier to market.
But isn't he supposed to be a big draw already?
He's popular. I won't deny that he has some popularity and some marketability. He's got some. That would be amplified if he really were thought of as one of the best fighters in the world, but he doesn't want to prove it.
Beating Ryan Garcia won't suffice because nobody thought Ryan was a pound-for-pound fighter. He's never even held a title at 135 or 140. That was a popular fight between two popular guys, but what it wasn't.
I mean, I said it ahead of the fight. That fight didn't crown the best lightweight in the world or the best super lightweight in the world. Commercially, it made a lot of money, but apparently Floyd is dissatisfied. That's not enough. It's not enough that Gervonta Davis and Ryan Garcia sold a lot of pay-per-views. He wants Gervonta Davis to be thought of as a pound-for-pound fighter.
Got a unique problem coming up because you can't fight just anybody and sell 1 million or 1.2 million pay-per-view buys.
You know, he goes back out there with an Isaac Cruz or somebody like that. Those numbers are going to plummet.
Yeah.
That he's now advocating for Gervonta Davis to be ranked on the pound for pound like he used to back when he was in the Gervonta Davis business might be a foreshadowing of things to come. Is Gervonta Davis being brought back into the fray?
What the hell does Mayweather care if he's there or not?
Based on how the matchmakers have been matching him, you get the impression that he doesn't want to be there anyway. He doesn't care about belts. He doesn't care about legacy. All he cares about is money.
Which is fine.
Which is fine. He's not holding up anything that needs to happen anyway. If he doesn't want to fight his contemporaries, it's his prerogative, but he can't expect to be thought of as one of the best of this era if he doesn't.
Because that's what pound-for-pound fighters do.
It's what it's all about, setting themselves apart.